All right, hello to our participants coming in. We're just about to get started. We're going to give it another minute or two as some more guests come to the AMA. Welcome, welcome. Lots of people coming in. Happy Thursday. Okay, we're going to give it about 30 more seconds and then we'll kick off. All right. Welcome, welcome. A few more people coming in. We'll continue to let people in, but we're going to go ahead and start to kick things off. So I would like to start by introducing myself. Hi, I am Gina Waldhorn. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Sports Innovation Lab. Welcome to this Thursday edition of our Ask Me Anything series. We started this Ask Me Anything series in an effort to bring the industry together during what is truly an unprecedented time for sports, and really push forward a conversation on how we all adapt, survive, and lead during this time. So we're going to continue to bring thought leaders from across the industry from different sectors together every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. So thanks for joining today. We'll tell you a little bit more about some of our future guests after today as well. But we'd like to go ahead and get started first with a little bit of rules of engagement on how this is going to work. And then I'll go ahead and introduce our host and our esteemed guest today, and we'll jump right into the conversation. So this is an Ask Me Anything. So we want you asking questions, and I'm going to show you exactly how we'd like you to do that. So what we're all asking you to do as you come in, you will note you're on mute. We have the power to unmute you, but we're going to leave most everyone on mute so that we can hear our guests today. And if for any reason we do want to have a conversation, we'll go ahead and unmute you. We'd like you to ask questions through the chat window. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Please ask anything. It isn't Ask Me Anything, so nothing is off limits. We just won't answer if we feel it is or should be. This session is being recorded, so I want to let you know that. And if you need to jump early or you know someone who you think would find value from this session, we'll go ahead and send you a link to watch this following today's session. And so for asking questions, so take a look in your Zoom at the bottom of your screen. You will see a menu bar and you will see a chat icon. So go ahead and click on that and you will expand a chat window to the right. There you can see that. At the bottom of that chat window is a space for you to publish your question. You can send it publicly so everyone can see your question, or if you've got something you'd like to send privately to the host, you can do that as well. And once you submit your question, you'll see it pop up in the queue. I'll go ahead and be moderating these questions and asking our host as we go. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our host for our Ask Me Anything series, which is Josh Walker. He is the co-founder and president of the Sports Innovation Lab, where he leads a roster of over 60 clients in the sports industry on how to create breakthrough fan experiences, as well as prepare their business for the ever-changing, ever-evolving fan, something we call here at the lab the fluid fan. Josh is a former VP of research at Forrester. He launched the Forrester Wave, a program all focused on an evaluation framework for innovation. And Josh is an entrepreneur using his passion for technology and data to launch several venture-backed companies And we're thrilled that he is leading us through this AMA series today. And we are really excited to have, for a limited appearance out of maternity leave, Angela Ruggiero. Angela is truly a leading figure in the sports world, having served as an elite athlete, an educator, an administrator, an innovator, an advisor, and a board member throughout the world of sport. In just really the past 2 years, she's been named Sports Business Journal's 40 Under 40. She's been on Forbes's list of the top 25 most powerful women in sport. She's a member of the U.S. Olympic Committee's Hall of Fame, a member of the Olympic Hall of Fame, as well as a 4-time Olympic medalist, a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, and has been dubbed by Hockey Magazine as one of the best players in the world. She's also the co-founder and CEO of the Sports Innovation Lab, where she really sets the vision for how the lab can help brands create truly differentiated and breakthrough experiences for their fans. And today, because we're focused on the Olympics, it's important to call out that Ruggiero has served the Olympic movement on the administrative board and at different levels for over a decade. She was a member of the International Olympic Committee from 2010 to 2018. She's been a member of the executive board of the International Olympic Committee and the chairperson for the IOC Athletes Commission, which is the body representing all Olympic athletes worldwide. She's also served as a board member of the United States Olympic Committee, a foundation board member of the World Anti-Doping Agency, and was the former president and board member of the Women's Sports Foundation. So, and as I said, she's also coming out of maternity leave, having just brought a beautiful little baby boy into the world only a matter of weeks ago. So we're very excited to have Angela with us to talk to us about what's going on with the Olympics and offer a truly unique and expert opinion. So with that, I will hand it over to Josh and Angela.
Thank you, Gina. So welcome, everybody. I think like the past few weeks have been pretty crappy. So I was looking for some good news. And when I got on the phone with Angela the other night, I said, hey, what do you think about coming back and talking about Tokyo? She said, I'd love to. And I lit up because it's so great to have you back. Even if it only is for an hour. You guys don't know, but Angela had her baby boy just a month ago. It's coming on 2 months, but it's been a rare treat to grab her and have her weigh in on what's going on right now. So I want to reiterate everything Gina said. This is an opportunity for you guys to take a break from looking at the news, let your heads expand a little bit, think about the future. Hopefully it's a positive conversation and we can just come together as a community and think about how we're going to move forward from all of this. So with that, what I want to do is start off, Ange. I think a lot of people on this call have some familiarity with the Olympics, but a decision like postponing the Olympics is something that you've got a very unique perspective because you've been on the inside of the IOC. I think it'd be helpful for everybody to understand who are the stakeholders in a decision of this magnitude. And what do you expect was going on in Lausanne while they were trying to weigh whether or not they postponed the Olympics? And what other options do you think they probably had on the table?
Thanks, Gina. Thanks, Josh. And welcome everyone as well. It's a pleasure to be here. Excuse my red eyes, not sleeping as you can imagine. No, this is unprecedented. I think having been on the IOC for 8 years, sitting on the executive board there and being a part of all the decision-making processes, it wasn't taken lightly. I think that's part of the reason that this, people looked at them and said, why are you delaying this instead of moving down the obvious path? There is no obvious path. The IOC has stakeholders ranging from the athletes, which, first and foremost, they need to make sure that they consider their training schedules and qualification process. I think that was a big piece of why the athletes were urging them to delay and give a level playing field. Sponsors, obviously a lot of revenue being generated both from the sponsor and broadcast side, so they're weighing those massive stakeholders. They're juggling the sporting calendar. You can't just plop a new event in at any time. The jigsaw puzzle, as President Bach said, going into just determining what that would look like, obviously a massive undertaking in the next few weeks here. But at the end of the day, it's the organizing committee of Japan 2020 that has to juggle all these pieces. The IOC has the authority to vote for the organizing committee, which we did 7 years ago. So this is a 7-year process of selection, putting together the coordination commission, and then actually delivering the game. So you're 6 months out here, and now you're saying, or less than 6 months out, and you're saying suddenly, no, we're going to delay this, and all the massive stakeholders have to reorganize. And it's not just lifting and shifting; it's the contracts have to be re-signed. You have to think about contingencies and insurance, and contracts have to be. So again, I could talk forever, but just this has never happened. We've seen 3 times the games be canceled because of wartime. You've seen boycotts in the past, but you've never seen a postponement or a change of date. So this is a new obstacle that no one's ever seen before, and it's really not just falling into the hands of the IOC. It's really falling into the hands of the organizing committee in Tokyo that has to juggle all these massive parts. I'll mention volunteers, 80,000 volunteers now. I'll mention the fans and the $800 million worth of tickets that have been sold. Your travel, which given what's going on with Corona, can you even book a ticket at this point? Can you get refunds for those that have booked tickets? So not a small undertaking to change the date, which I think is why they decided to delay the announcement when they did. But now that they have, it's how do we put this all together?
So while I'm asking everybody else to weigh in on whether or not the IOC did the right thing by launching one of our polls here, can you talk over the poll for a minute while people are answering the question of whether or not the IOC did the right thing? Yes or no? You guys should weigh in here. Right now, it seems like everybody is very much on the page that they did do the right thing. I'm not just coloring the responses, but there seems to be not a single person that says they did not. I will share the results in about 20 seconds here. So if you haven't voted, please do. And what happened at the IOC? Like who made this a decision that needed to be made in this period of time? Right. We all from the outside could see the press. We all heard the athletes starting to, raise their voice here. But who do you think really precipitated the conversation or the decision being made this week versus maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the road? Who would have created that urgency to say we need to make a decision now?
Well, the IOC has, for the record, they have a reserve fund in case the games ever did get canceled. They have cancellation insurance. I mean, they're prepared for at least one edition of the games to be able to essentially fund the rest of the sporting world. 90% of the IOC's revenue gets redistributed. That goes between the organizing committee itself and all the federations, the international, National Olympic committees. So there's a contingency plan that's been in place, but of course you don't want to go down that path. But it's not the IOC's decision alone. This is really a joint decision with Tokyo 2020, who ultimately they outsource the games too, and they say you have the rights. Here are the guarantees you need to sign. But it's Tokyo 2020, and having the prime minister step up with the IOC president and agree on it. But as you've probably read, the outside pressure from athletes, first the Canadian Olympic Committee, then the Australian Olympic Committee, the US Paralympic Committee recently saying, the games have to be postponed due to all the concerns of fans and athletes in particular. So there isn't one stakeholder. There are the visible stakeholders of the National Olympic Committees that stepped up and said, look, we're not going to send our athletes. And I'm sure that put a tremendous amount of pressure to Tokyo 2020 and the IOC to do the right thing, if you will, knowing the economic impact and complexity that would go into that decision.
So you were head of the Athlete Commission. Can you briefly describe what that role was? Because one of our first questions is, how should an athlete reorganize their planning to arrive under the optimal conditions next year? I imagine part of that question is both logistics, but also training. What kind of considerations would be going through your head as an athlete and some of the athletes you represented as a head of that commission?
Sure. So that's essentially the Global IOC Athletes Commission. It's the commission within the IOC, essentially our union, if you will, without being separate. It's integrated into. But I sat on the executive board and would relay the concerns of the athletes across all sports, all countries, all genders. Full stop. We were the place to organize what those thoughts were, and they're different. Again, if you're in a country that has no signs of corona, you might have a different perspective. But if you're in a country that's on lockdown and you're stuck at home and you can't train, you're at a competitive disadvantage. If you're at a sport that said, look, we're on lockdown as well, and there's no qualification process. I sit on the board of World Rugby, and at World Rugby, we're exploring, well, if we can't host these qualification tournaments as an athlete, you're going to have to rely on previous results. Maybe certain countries weren't participating or athletes weren't participating. So you're not necessarily going to guarantee you have the best of the best in normal processes. So the athletes, I think, come from different environments, but ultimately the majority were saying, we want to be safe individually if we're there. We don't want to get contaminated. You saw at the NBA, one athlete has it and everyone else doesn't want to be exposed to that on the playing field or in the village or in competition venues at the games. But leading up to it, you're stuck at home. You can't train. You can't qualify in an even way. So a lot of these concerns were coming through the athletes' channels with the Athletes Commission, as well as through the Individual Athletes Commission with the National Olympic Committees and international federations, which I think led to that pressure to change.
And again, just by working with you, I've learned so many of these terms and acronyms, but the organizing committee in Tokyo is the OCOG, right?
Yep.
Did I get that right? And the OCOG, some of these questions, if I can summarize them on the right-hand side here, is about like, what risks or protections do they have on the financial side of things? And I'm assuming your work with the Youth Olympic Games and Rio probably fit in here at some level. Like, is there protection? Is there financial protection that the IOC provides for an OCOG if some situation like this were to arise? I know this is unprecedented, but we've had problems with delays in buildings. We've had problems with other things that potentially risk operating the games, right?
Yeah, so a lot of the risk falls on the OCOG. I think that's why there's such there's a lockstep communication across the Coordination Commission, the IOC, and the organizing committee, the OCOG. OCOG, if there's overruns or delays, a lot of that burden gets put on that organizing committee, that local government, which is, again, when you read in the paper, overages, they're unexpected like any big project. And again, this is the largest event in the world. It's setting the tone, I think, across the board. So there's a lot of risk. As I mentioned before, Josh, the IOC does have contingency plans. They have a cancellation budget, but I don't think that's ever, I wasn't in the room with the executive board, but I doubt that was explored. Then there's a slight tweakage of the name. I think you've seen President Bach saying 2020 versus 2021. Because now you're talking about an overlap of sponsors. You have sponsors that are going to expire at the end of the year. You have, new terms, new quads, if you will, which a lot of the budgets are set against. And that, unfortunately is going to be something that people have to figure out. So it's a very, very complex and fluid situation, I think, at the moment. But of course, there's contingency plans for different things like this.
So you were on the bidding committee to try to get the games to Boston, and then you were on the chief strategy officer for LA 2024, eventually 2028. One of the biggest things that you talked about with me about the ability for that group to have so many years was that any sponsor that potentially came in early could use the mark for a long period of time. There's a question here about, what do you think would happen with the usage of the mark if you bought the 2020, rights package and everything else? Would that be extended to non-top sponsors that were in that camp? What do you think the considerations would be around the usage of the mark in the rings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see how the contracts were drawn out. My sense is just reading some of President Bach's comments and knowing that the intention of the contract would probably be for the addition of the games versus the actual date. So there's going to be some overlap here. You look at Allianz, the insurance provider. They're technically a top sponsor that start in 2021. Well, now they're under the umbrella of Tokyo 2021. Will they get rights to that? I would think no. Again, that's to be determined. But certainly all the sponsors that have top sponsors that have paid for this edition of the games, that those rights will be extended. And again, you get into LA28, you mentioned, they just signed Delta, one of their biggest, their biggest announcement, I think, to date. United is the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee sponsor right now. There's going to be overlap there, and that joint venture kicks into effect at the end of the year. So all these conversations, again, I'm not at the front lines of those, but they're going to have to figure out when do rights start, when do rights end, when can we allow some flexibility for the intent of the contract, which is we're going to give you this edition of the game. And even though that, are you allowed to use those rights? Allianz is an example, starting in January 1, but then maybe black out during the period of the games because you haven't paid for that edition. So that's why this was such a hard, I think, decision. It took a little bit longer than the public may have anticipated, but enormous amount of complexity and revenue, that is at stake here.
And you mentioned the qualifications for rugby and some of the ways of getting into the games may need to be revisited. A lot of the questions on the right here are also about the competitive schedule. So what will this do to other world championships, even other Olympic games if there's, too close together? What do you think the considerations are around the competitive schedule?
It's one of the biggest, I think, challenges. The IOC is actually meeting with all 33 international federations today, obviously a teleconference. No one's getting on planes. The IOC actually is working completely remote at this point. They're home in Lausanne, Switzerland. So next summer, Tokyo is actually hosting the swimming championships. You've got the US hosting the track and field championships. So those may need to move if they decide on a summer date. And everyone seems to be saying, well, just pick the same dates. Well, given the fact that there's a lot of summer federations that have tournaments during the summer, that it's not just as easy as picking the same dates. You're on a 4-year cycle, and usually in the year 1, 2, and 3, you have world championships, you have other tournaments that generate revenue for your federation. So just moving those, again, you want to be flexible, which I believe those two federations have sort of hinted that they would be flexible. But now you're talking about an impact on the individual federations' revenue. So not as easy as just picking new dates next summer. Some people have said, well, the temperature, given how, that's been a concern leading up to Tokyo, why don't you move it to the spring? Well, you could do that, but now you're looking, you'd have to negotiate that with the broadcasters that have locked that time schedule in and maybe want to promote that and not be up against the NFL or the NBA or something that they're trying to sell. Here in the US, NBC might not want to do that. They have their summer schedule open. So again, lots of different stakeholders, but on the federation side, certainly they're having those conversations already.
And we have another question here. And I these Ask Me Anythings jump around, and you're an Olympian, you can move quickly, even with 3 hours of sleep. How does this change the impact of the overarching legacy plans that the OCOG may have put into their bid? Who gives them leniency for that, or who has to reconsider that? What's the process of the legacy plans, I guess, that were built into the original bid commitment?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, one example that's going to be tricky is the Athletes Village. They were going to convert that into a legacy of apartments. They'd already sold them, and usually you're talking about 11,000 athletes, another 5,000 staff, so 16,000+ beds that you're building that are ready to go this July, and now you're kicking that contract back a year. You may have sold those because the legacy plan is we're going to turn over public housing for the community in Tokyo. What are you going to do? Are you going to, this is what Tokyo 20 is really dealing with. So it's an excellent question. They can't just sell those and then kick those people out next summer if they decide to do the games next summer. Now they might need a contingency to build more housing if that's the case. So legacy is a massive part of every games. You know, when you're spending right now, it's 12.6 billion is what Tokyo 2020 has said they've spent putting these games on. A lot of that is infrastructure, buildings like the host athletes village. They want to turn that over to be a positive legacy on the city. And so now the venues that they're not owning, again, the city doesn't own a lot of these, they rent them or lease them. They have to figure out, are those dates available next summer to lease? And now we have to renegotiate it, and we hope we're going to get favorable deals, but you know, again, everything is fluid at this point. So legacy is a massive part of the games. We want a positive legacy. We want those contingency plans in place, and hopefully, you know, given the current environment, there's a little bit more leniency to figuring out what that could look like. But excellent question.
So the first poll I launched only had 2 choices, so you guys got off easy. I'm asking you guys to really think through what this decision may impact the most. Do you think it'll be the in-person attendance for 2021 when they actually launch the game? Will fewer people attend? Will different athletes actually participate? Will there be lower potential athlete participation in general because of fear, health concerns, or other sort of logistical challenges? Will sponsorship involvement change? Will media production change dramatically? Do you think between now and then, will there be enough technological and digital innovation to really change the way the games are produced? And then finally, do you think viewership will change? So I'm going to give you guys a few more seconds to answer that question.
One thing, Josh, I'll jump in while people are answering. Just a consideration for the athletes. Some athletes would have qualified this summer. They may not qualify next year. So this is having a material impact, I think. Again, I'm not trying to sway the poll, but you know, some of the athletes' concerns are just that I'm aging out, or I've applied to medical school and I was supposed to start, you know, in the fall. What do I do? You know, I played hockey for 16 years on the U.S. Olympic team or a national team. I had to try out every single tournament. Maybe you make it this year, but you're not going to make it next year. So a lot of these stakeholders are obviously affected in different ways, whether it's revenue or you know, their livelihood.
Well, I don't know if it's because we're in the middle of our own fear bubble right now with our lockdown and our, you know, shelter in place stuff, but a lot of people think that it may affect the in-person attendance, the live audience. 43% said that. Athlete participation is 25%, and then sponsorship involvement and media production. Interestingly, they don't think it's going to have a much of an impact on viewership. Maybe we touch on the media piece a bit here, Ange, which is
yeah. Before we dive into media, Josh, I want to just say one thing. Again, my positive, you know, hat on. I think this is such an amazing opportunity, given what's going on. If in-person attendance declines, which I don't think it will, I think they're not going to host the games if it's not safe to be in the, you know, in the stadium. But the opportunity for when the games actually come on to have the Olympics come back to what it represents, which is bringing the world together. I think there's a big opportunity here. Again, we'll talk about the media strategy a bit, but using those platforms to actually bring the world together, whether they're in person or doing it virtually, which everyone's becoming experts at. It's symbolic, and I think why you and I are so excited to be a part of the sports industry.
Well, I do think that that's the nature of this decision in general. You know, a few weeks ago when we did our first Ask Me Anything, people asked me what I thought. And I certainly am no expert and only felt like I could weigh in based on what I heard by being in your shadow, which is that the IOC always takes the Olympic Games as an opportunity to bring the world together. And that this had to have been something that they felt could be a moment to heal. And bring the world back together on one platform. So it couldn't have been done lightly from the geopolitical perspective, which you've always made me very aware of, which is there's a huge diplomacy piece of the games that we don't really get to see from the outside. So anyway, the media side of things, NBC, obviously huge commitments. Everybody's talking about the huge gap they now have in programming this summer with, I think, 17 days that they were dedicating to this. You worked on the Olympic Channel and were part of that strategy group. what do you think is going to be done this summer to at least create some sense that there was a games planned? Or do you think they'll just hold their powder and wait until 2021?
Yeah, to be determined. NBC, again, here in the US, sold 90%, I believe, of their ad inventory, 1.25 billion is what I've read. I imagine they'll be able to just shift those contracts for next summer. Whether they fill it with Olympic type of programming, NBC does have the Olympic channel now in their linear programming. The Olympic channel is, again, OTT service. I sat on the board when that launched, that the IOC created in order to fill the gap. So instead of every 2 or 3 weeks, every 2 years, it's programming 24/7. I believe they'll really ramp up the offering and maybe provide that to some of the providers and all the different geographies to have some programming there. And again, that's one thing that the IOC could do through the Olympic channel, but it's up to every individual territory to figure out what their contingency plan is. We talk a lot about, Josh, athlete-driven media. Now, athletes I see are getting on Twitter, getting on Facebook, Instagram, and creating content now because they're at home. I believe they have an opportunity to fill the void. I believe that federations are going to be able to maybe reuse content. My NCAA game from 2003 was on Facebook the other day. I was like, wow, suddenly NCAA, because of March Madness cancellation, is filling it with, our NCAA final, which we lost. So I was a little upset about having to rewatch that. 15 plus years ago. So the reuse of content and the Olympic channel has that. They, about a third of its content is world championships, or a third of it is, post-production rights that they've owned of previous world championships. And a third is original content programming, which probably, they might ramp up today. So it's a great question. I don't have an answer. I can only hypothesize that it's an opportunity to innovate. It's an opportunity to try new things, whether you try new platforms or try new types of content. But I will say the IOC needs it. We're aging up. A lot of our viewers are a lot older, and we have to get younger. We have to be innovative. And this is the best time I think we've ever had to really press forward and try new things to capture that younger audience.
And you've been in those rooms. You've shared your frustration with me on how quickly the IOC can innovate. If you were in those rooms today, sitting there with the leadership, where would you press them to focus on innovation? What would be the top 3 areas that you would say, look, this is a terrible situation. We have this time now. We should do X, Y, Z.
I would first say digital. I mean, can you take your media strategy, given everyone's at home now, everyone's staring at this, looking at their computers. That's how we're connecting with one another. They did a deal with TikTok late last year. I applauded them for that. There's ways I think the IOC right now, and I sit on the Digital and Technology Commission. I'm privy to some of these conversations. We're moving into, we need to evolve. We can't just be linear. We need to really double down on engaging and connecting with youth in a way that they want to communicate with us. So I would say linear, digital, sort of that media strategy is the first and foremost, pressing item I would continue to push on. There's an opportunity, I think, just to work with the athletes too in a new way. Again, we outsource a lot. That's why the processes are very slow. There's a lot of process within the IOC to keep the multiple stakeholders 205.
Yeah, let's pause on the outsource thing. Is this time for them to rethink some of that? Do they need to bring some of these technology skills in-house? Has the IOC done that in your tenure there? Have they ever said, this is such a critical attribute of running the games, we need to own some of this and not let the OCOGs do it, or not rely on Atos or all these other vendors to do it? Like, do they ever build a capability?
Yeah, I mean, that's what OBS is, Olympic, broadcasting. They said, instead of letting everyone individually, conduct, we're going to have more control and therefore provide a more consistent product across the globe. So there definitely have been, examples of that in the past. I think given the complexity, again, it's hard to continue to just outsource. So we're think the IOC is continuing to think about what are the ways we can standardize, and that but it costs more money, obviously, to do it in home, and staff up against it versus outsourcing it to everyone. But certainly they're going to be, innovation at this point. I was looking forward to see Tokyo, what they had in store, and the activations of all the sponsors, both the top sponsors and the local sponsors. I think they have over $3 billion in local sponsors. I mean, this is not that's an innovative economy. So every games has the opportunity to innovate and be different, and they try to differentiate themselves. That's the exciting part of this relationship. They're not just lifting and shifting the same thing. They're really, again, under Agenda 2020, trying to do things differently. LA 28 is an example. That's all we did is thought about how do we do things differently, make the games better, and leave that legacy. So Tokyo, Beijing, Paris, Milan, LA, they're all thinking about how do we do things differently and better to reflect, more fondly on our city and our country.
Do you think we'll see a reshuffling of some of the partners too? I mean, you've always said to me that, Intel, Alibaba, some of these large technology companies are starting to become top sponsors. Is it time for them to almost proactively bring, more of the tech into this world? Was there a big push on that and that's just more of the same, or could this create some urgency they didn't have?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We, previously, most of the top sponsors, consumer goods, things that you just literally write a check and you activate in your own individual. Well, when it's a technology provider and you're integrated with the OCOG and your solution is, going to actually impact the delivery of the games, well, now it's a different conversation. And so having the right technology providers, which again, have the margins, have the budgets, that's why we're seeing Intel and Alibaba and these big companies come in. 100% what you said, Josh. I believe this is the time now to better integrate and lean on them for their subject matter expertise and not just say this is how it's always been done. And so this shift away from franchise to really being innovative and different and providing some flexibility to the tops, which are playing, $500 million. You want to give them something in return outside of just the logo. Is 100%, I think, an opportunity to innovate and do things better.
And each of the games, I have to imagine, was the place where a lot of this business got done, where a lot of the hospitality and a lot of the deal making happened. Does this postponement put some of that revenue at risk, or the IOC has enough pattern recognition and enough of these systems in place that the sponsorship sales still happen? The quad is a certain quad at risk because of certain, timing around this?
Well, I think a lot of those conversations will just happen next year. So you're not really losing revenue. The quad period now is 1 year less. So you might, take a slight haircut on what you would pay for that quad because you have 1 less year to use the logo and use the rights. They
were already starting to do smaller deals though, right? Shorter terms and things like that.
Yes, in some cases, but the IOC president Bach prides himself on as long as possible. I mean, we have, NBC tied up till 3032. They're the largest individual contributor. So there's, the stability of having partners in place for long term is a big piece of what the IOC pushes for. But again, you want that nimbleness and flexibility. You talked about Atos, some of these technology providers, you might want more nimbleness. We talk about this all the time at Sports Innovation Lab. The technology evolves so quickly. If you're locking in for a decade plus, they may not be the right provider, 10 years later. And that's a big issue across the board with every organizing committee. They have to lock up partners early on. And if you have that overlap of not just writing a check, but actually implementing and helping with the delivery, you want the best support possible.
So I'm going to launch our last poll here, and then we will take your final question. So if you haven't put your question in the chat box yet, please do. And for those of you, if I haven't asked your question, I'm not entirely sure what you're asking. So if you want to give it another shot and reframe it, I'm definitely reading it. I'm just not sure what to say. So There's a few in there that seem interesting, but I don't know how I would answer them, so I'm not going to put Angela on the spot, especially because she's only slept 3 hours. Okay, so this question is, from the global reaction, what do you believe most? Meaning, like, we've seen now how the global community is responding to this. Do you think that this decision reinforces the global importance of the Olympics, doesn't change much, or proves that the Olympics are becoming less relevant or important to our society? So if you guys could weigh in on that, that would give us some good perspective on where your heads are at. And Ange, what do you think about that? What do you think? Do you think the global reaction to this decision validates the importance of the Olympics, or are we in a bubble because we work in the sports industry and it seems more important to us than to others?
Well, I think the sports industry in general lives in a bubble. We need to, look around. But this isn't just a sporting event. I think that's why the world paid attention when this happened. This is, it's a sporting event, but at the end of the day, it's one of the few opportunities for the world to come together, and that's what we need right now. I mean, we're facing a pandemic. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have to work together in our individual communities, within our individual families, and globally speaking, to slow this virus down. And so I think when you're talking with those overtones, the IOC uses them all the time. I think what I've learned, whether in my 4 Olympics or the 8 years I served on the IOC, it's the ethos of the Olympics is to bring the world together, to, march aside an athlete that maybe you're at war with. I talked a lot about the North and South Korean women's hockey teams playing on the same unified joint team in the 2018 Olympics, and the symbolism that brought to the world, that peace might be possible. And, so those are the things that, again, I think the Olympics represent. Of course, it's about the best athletes in the world and seeing that athletic feat, but for a lot of the world, they tune in to also see, bringing the world together, and that's why I think they paid attention. Not just that, but the economic impact. I mean, we can't doubt what the impact that this is. And if the Olympics are willing to postpone and change, the trickle down is everything else, for that matter, probably falls into that category.
All right, so I'm gonna try this one, and if you don't know, you can punt. But this probably is insider baseball that I'm unaware of. So Rule 40. Now that brands, no Olympic partners have more time to plan a commercial campaign with Olympic athletes, with the guidelines provided by the IOC and some NOCs. Do you think the IOC will change Rule 40 regulations according to these circumstances? Is that something that you guys talked a lot about? What is Rule 40? Do you know?
Yeah, Rule 40 essentially is the, commercial rights and what the athletes can and can't do during, before, and after the games. There's been a lot more flexibility to Rule 40 in recent years. It's essentially a rule to protect the top sponsors. But, just for those listening, if I'm a Nike athlete and Adidas is the global sponsor, just hypothetically speaking, I can't activate and thank Nike during the games. I can't wear their logo. It gets blacked out. I'd have to wear Adidas if they were the top sponsor or the sponsor at hand. So there's a flexibility recently to allow athletes to benefit, because if I'm not getting paid by Adidas, I have less opportunity to earn, even though the games are making money off of my back. I can't make money from Nike. So at the end of the day, NOCs national Olympic committees have more flexibility within Rule 40. They have to have previously had, advocate for more flexibility. The U.S. certainly is moving down that path, because there's a massive market here, and a lot of the athletes here are saying it's unfair that they can't activate and make money off of their own likeliness during the games. The question seems to be around, well, how will this impact? I think it just gives us more time to further push. A lot of athletes want more, but the IOC is always going to be protective, because if that ecosystem breaks down and that money from the tops doesn't get redistributed to the international sports and the National Olympic committees, that money is going to be very important. And it just brings up a fact that is going to be an impact this year. If you were waiting for a check from the IOC because of the games, either whether you're a federation or a National Olympic Committee, you have to delay your payment 1 year. What's going to happen to domestic sport now across the world, to federations across the world? They're slashing budgets. So Rule 40 definitely impacts the athletes. And I certainly hope that any sponsor that's working with an athlete today, whether they're a top or not, will do right and help these athletes just in the way we have governments coming in and stepping up and supporting businesses. I hope the sponsors know that that's the lifeblood of Olympic athletes, and that they'll extend their contracts a year and work with them and provide that flexibility they need.
The talk in the U.S. right now is about the stimulus package for small businesses that have been affected by the shutdown. Will the federations have access to any capital that they may need in, the contingency planning here? Does the IOC maintain a budget for that? Is there an alternative, route for funding if these federations are really cash strapped?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a contingency plan for that they would implement today. The IOC would implement today. I imagine, just like our government, the IOC is probably considering maybe an advance payment so that they can, they can at least have some minimum amount of capital coming in to these federations. But every federation is largely autonomous, and they have to operate on their own. So if they're an advanced federation and have that in place, or have taken out insurance previously, or have those reserves, like, that's fantastic. But I imagine there's going to be a lot of federations that don't. And so the IOC might be willing, I imagine, to give some level of capital to those federations, because typically they wait till the end of the games to determine what tier that federation is in. If they're in the top tier, they get a larger percentage of the revenue. Middle, if they're a smaller sport with less viewership, they might get a less. So the final algorithm doesn't play out till after the games, but I'm not aware of something today. So again, this is a very fluid situation, Josh, and I certainly hope they figure it out, because to not have a budget if you're a federation, and not, and a lot of these federations are going to be canceling events and not have the revenue from their own, qualifications or ticket sales sponsorship that they are depending on.
Well, a number of people that I know well are messaging me privately with 3 or 4 different examples of governments that are going to step up and potentially help the federations. I'm not really sure on what level they would receive funding, in advance of hospitals or in advance of schools and things like that, where they sit in the tier. But you've always said that the U.S. is the only nation that doesn't fund our U.S. team, so it's an interesting.
Yeah, every other country has international. They have a sports minister. They actually have a budget, and they're in charge of funding sport in that country. We are, in the U.S., very unique in that we essentially give the rights over to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and say, "Don't bother us. Don't ask for money. Go raise it." We're completely dependent on fundraising, on sponsors, to redistribute that money to our local national governing bodies, USA Hockey, USA Track and Field, etc. So our model is more private. Again, you have to pay. If you want your kids to play baseball, you got to pay for it. In most other countries, it's free. It's part of that program. And so it doesn't surprise me that that governments will step in, because sport and government are actually connected throughout most of the world. One example though, Josh, I went to Africa about, I don't know, I'm aging myself, 16 years ago after I graduated, and with Right to Play. It's an organization that handed out soccer balls and taught various games, health-related exercises through play. And I remember it was so impactful to me, because yes, you want to hand out food. Yes, you want to hand out vaccines. Yes, you need to do all the basic elements of supporting the population, which every government now is figuring out. How do we make sure people have the bare necessities? This is why sport, I think, is so important. Sport adds such an element, in my opinion, that brings the world together, but gives that cohesion that we're looking for. So I do hope governments step up. Think about youth soccer, the trickle-down effect. If that organizing committee, or if that money isn't coming into the youth sports, those kids aren't going to be able to play. Pretend we're cooped up here for 3 months. Now you finally get to go outside, and there's no money for kids to come together and play soccer and play football. Those are the sort of trivial, resources in some cases that I hope governments step up and say, no, this is important. This is a psychological, physiological need that our society has to have to rebound from what we all just went through.
So what I've tried to do with our previous AMAs is end on a positive note. And a number of these questions have really been designed to draw out the inspirational Olympian in you. So I'm going to let you weigh in on sort of what's the silver lining here? What is the good that could come out of a situation like this where there's more time, that athletes could potentially do other things, could train longer? It's obviously going to have a big effect on the way that media is going to be produced. Where do you see the positive coming out of this situation?
Yeah, a tremendous, burden for sure to all stakeholders, but I always see tremendous opportunity. You mentioned athletes. This is an opportunity to engage with your fans, create content, be that role model, be that, level of stability for the young boy or girl that's scared right now. Reassure them and entertain them. For sponsors, okay, you're not spending money today. You can reallocate that budget, maybe that you were going to use to activate in Tokyo, to donate to the Red Cross, to do something to support, yes, we'll have to come up with that capital next year again. Hopefully the world rebounds. To broadcasters, now is your time to, again, double down on OTT, double down on digital, double down on the, in your streaming services, the things that I believe will take the games into the next generation. We 100% need that. And there isn't a better opportunity than now to really focus on that strategy. The organizing committee, please just execute. At the end of the day, I don't think they need to overpromise, but if they can get this jigsaw puzzle right in the near term, that is a feat that should go down in history. And at the end of the day, if all these things come together, if the fans show up, and all those stakeholders show up and work together to make this successful in, say, a year, I'm super positive that more people will tune in, that will engage a younger audience, and that, again, the Olympics, which are so symbolic. And as an athlete, yes, I want to win a gold medal, but when I compete, when I come home and I see the impact I have as an athlete and the inspiration that I've given to the world, it's bigger than you. It's bigger than your country. It's bigger than your sport. It's bigger than yourself. And so that's the opportunity I see with the Olympics today is, yes, this is going to be a massive hurdle. We can all do our own individual thing to support this shift in schedule. But we'll come out of it for the better, and again, put the Olympics where I believe it should be in the future.
Well, I mentioned this at the beginning of the call. We've been doing a few of these, and what we've been doing is trying to track the impact on this situation across all of sport. And because most of the people that were drawn to joining Angela on this AMA are likely going to have a global perspective, what I wanted to draw your attention to is the dashboard we've created, which is on our homepage, which is tracking the economic impact of COVID on the actual sports industry. And what we're missing, because it's not really accessible, readily accessible, is a lot of information about global sport. So if you guys get a chance, please check this out. Join our Slack community, which Gina will talk to you about in a second, and offer up the details and the recommendations on the methodology behind this so that we can provide you all with the best information we possibly can get our hands on. So that's a little bit of a plug for the work that we're trying to do to help give all of you guys the best data that you can have to make some of the decisions you're trying to make. So with that, I want to say thank you to my partner for joining us. I couldn't have done this without you.
Josh,
And
you're the
it's great to
best.
see your face. And it's certainly great to hear your voice. So did you guys get to see the screen? Did I share it? Yeah? No?
Yep.
Josh,
Yep.
let me leave. We've got great resources. We are just trying to support the community, again, under your guidance right now. I appreciate it, my whole team. If there's something the sports community needs, wants, is interested in, obviously that's what this Slack community is for. We are here to service the globe and really try to bring sports into the, forward. And I've been talking about the Olympics, but I believe this is across all sport. This is a massive opportunity for us. The world is going to be thriving the world is going to be in need of sport when we come out of this, in need of aggregating and being next to each other and sharing in that community. So not just for entertainment's sake. So that's why I'm really excited too, that we're having these AMAs across the board, and I'll certainly be tuning in from afar.
Just not too far. All right, Gina, you want to take it away? Angela, thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Angela. So what I've got up on the screen right now is the invite to our Slack community. You can also find it just by going to our homepage, sportsilab.com. But this is a global community of sports professionals looking to connect, share ideas, strategies, facilitate business development at a difficult time like this for everyone. So please come join us. It's free to join, and just follow that link. And then want to encourage everybody to join us on Tuesday next week. We are going to be joined by the commissioner of the A10 conference, Bernadette McGlade. So a lot of interesting topics there to cover. Obviously more cancellations, postponements, the impact to the collegiate athlete. So it's going to be a really fantastic conversation, and thrilled to have Bernadette join us. So if you know anyone else who you think would make for a fantastic AMA, if you are someone who would love to join this platform and believe you have a unique perspective to offer, jump in that Slack channel and hit one of myself or one of the team members up. We'd love to host you. And as a final reminder, I will be sending a link to view this video conference for everyone following in the next probably hour. So thank you everyone for joining us. Stay safe out there, and hopefully we'll see you all back on Tuesday at 1 p.m. next week.
Stay safe, everybody. Bye, guys.